Today we're about to explore the life of someone you might not instantly recognize, but I guarantee you benefit from her life's work literally every single day. We're talking about the forgotten mastermind behind modern American labor rights. So let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the extraordinary story of the architect of the American safety net.
Think about this for a second. Who actually invented your weekend? Seriously, it's something we totally take for granted now. But who actually went to bat for the modern weekend? Who fought tooth and nail for the overtime pay, the unemployment insurance, and the retirement accounts that millions of us rely on? Because, well, those things didn't just magically appear out of thin air. They were the result of a grueling, decades-long battle against some seriously entrenched interests.
And the answer to that question? Frances Perkins. She was the very first female U.S. cabinet member, serving as FDR's Secretary of Labor from 1933 all the way to 1945. She remains the longest-serving Secretary of Labor in history, and during that time, she basically engineered what we now call the New Deal's grand experiment. But to really get how she pulled this off, we have to look at the exact moment that sparked her lifelong crusade.
Which brings us to part 1, the factory fire, changing America. To really understand Perkins's unyielding drive, we've got to jump back to a terrifying catalyst in 1911 New York City. This was an event that literally altered the course of American history, and Frances Perkins was right there to witness it firsthand. 146. That is the devastating human toll of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. On a late afternoon in March 1911, a fire broke out in a wastebasket on the 8th floor of the factory. It quickly spread to paper patterns hanging from the ceiling. And get this, the blaze lasted just 18 minutes. 18 minutes! But it left 146 workers dead. Perkins was actually already working as a factory inspector in New York at the time, and she saw the tragedy unfold with her own eyes. She watched young men and women leaping from windows to their deaths simply because the firemen's ladders were too short and the fire escapes had completely collapsed.
To really grasp the absolute helplessness of these workers, just listen to the words of survivor Mary Domskis-Abrams. She recalled how the front doors were securely locked, supposedly to prevent employee theft. She said, "My own machine was located near the locked front doors. Before this door, the greatest number of victims were caught. They had surged to the door, hoping to escape, but couldn't break through." The sheer horror of those locked doors and the utter lack of basic safety regulations, it became the defining moment of Frances Perkins' life. It transformed her into an unstoppable force for reform.
Moving on to part 2, hacking the male mind, a strategic operative. Now, in a government that was completely dominated by men, Perkins knew that raw passion just wasn't going to be enough to change the laws. She had to figure out how to navigate a highly complex, often downright hostile environment to get things done. And she was incredibly strategic about this. Perkins actually kept a folder, literally titled Notes on the Male Mind. She brilliantly crafted a specific persona to bypass male resistance. Step 1. She changed her style to dress more matronly, figuring out that the easiest way men could accept a woman in power was to subconsciously associate her with their own mothers. Step 2. At official functions, she would deliberately go sit with the wives of cabinet members rather than the office holders. And Step 3. She was perfectly willing to let men take all the credit for her ideas, just as long as the legislation passed. She totally put her own ego aside for the greater good.
All right, part 3, secret desk drawer, ambitious agenda. So, this brings us to 1933. FDR has just won the presidency in the absolute depths of the Great Depression, and he taps Perkins to be his Secretary of Labor. But she wasn't just going to take the job for the prestige. No, she brought a massive, highly ambitious agenda straight to the Oval Office.
In fact, before she even accepted the position, she laid out this incredible 10-point plan. She told FDR point-blank she wanted to abolish child labor, establish a minimum wage, limit working hours, create unemployment insurance, and develop old-age pensions. This bold, sprawling list laid the absolute foundation for the New Deal. Now, FDR actually balked at first, warning her that courts at the time considered a lot of these ideas flat-out unconstitutional. But she was totally undeterred.
And this next bit perfectly captures her pragmatic foresight. When early New Deal laws, like the National Recovery Act, started facing Supreme Court challenges, Perkins wasn't caught off guard at all. She told FDR, "I've got 2 bills locked in the lower left-hand drawer of my desk against an emergency." She literally had alternate, quote-unquote, unconstitutional bills secretly locked away just in case. When the Supreme Court did eventually strike down the NRA in 1935, she simply opened that drawer, pulled out her backup plans, and those eventually became permanent law. Genius, right?
Let's look at part 4, the taxing power, bulletproof strategy. This was one of her absolute biggest challenges, creating a sustainable, bulletproof national pension system during the worst economic crisis in American history. I'm talking about the creation of Social Security.
Now, Perkins was up against some wildly popular alternative ideas at the time. The Townsend Plan, for example, called for direct government handouts of $200 a month to every senior. The public loved it, but it was completely unsustainable financially. Perkins envisioned something different, an earned insurance system funded by worker and employer contributions. But the legal challenge here was massive. How on earth do you make a federal pension program constitutional without the Supreme Court striking it down for overstepping states' rights?
Well, the breakthrough actually happened at a social gathering. Perkins approached her friend, Supreme Court Justice Harlan Stone, and confided her worries about the constitutionality of her social insurance plan. While he couldn't officially comment on pending legislation, he gave her the exact legal loophole she needed, whispering to her, "The taxing power, my dear, the taxing power." That was the secret. By basing the Social Security Act of 1935 on the federal government's undisputed right to levy taxes, she made the law virtually bulletproof against Supreme Court challenges.
Now for part 5, ending child labor, baseline worker rights. With Social Security officially passed, Perkins immediately shifted her focus to ending the exploitation of children and establishing baseline rights for workers all across the country.
When you look at her timeline, her sheer endurance is just remarkable. She starts in 1933, secures the Social Security Act in 1935, and by 1938, she engineers the Fair Labor Standards Act. And she did all of this while facing severe political opposition, relentless sexism, and even impeachment threats from the Dies Committee in 1939 for alleged communist sympathies. She pushed through all of it to fundamentally rewrite the rules of American labor.
So what were the actual results of that 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act? Well, for one, it established the very first federal minimum wage, 25 cents an hour. But the FLSA did so much more than that. It simultaneously banned oppressive child labor and legally created the 40-hour workweek. So really, if you have ever gotten paid time and a half for working over 40 hours, you can trace that directly back to Frances Perkins and this specific piece of legislation.
Which brings us to part 6, a lasting legacy in every paycheck. Let's just take a moment to summarize this incredible journey. From the ashes of a horrific factory fire all the way to the highest levels of government, Frances Perkins' pragmatism and her unyielding focus transformed the tragic memory of 146 dead workers into enduring, tangible legal protections for millions of Americans.
Her lifelong, unwavering mission really can be summed up in her own words. She once said, "I came to Washington to work for God, FDR, and the millions of forgotten, plain, common working men." You see, she didn't seek the spotlight. She sought results. And by reading the male mind, utilizing legal backdoors like the taxing power, and literally keeping backup bills locked in her desk drawer, she achieved a legacy that completely outlasted all of her critics.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. The next time you clock out for the weekend, or the next time you look at the deductions on your paycheck that secure your future, will you remember the woman who fought the system to give it to you? Frances Perkins might not be the most famous name in your history textbooks, but her legacy is quite literally woven into the fabric of your everyday life. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking questions about the world around you.